Hello and welcome to Transforming Worlds. In today's episode, I speak with Dave Gray. Dave Gray is a possibilitarian. He helps people imagine and create a better world individually and together. In 1993, he founded XPLANE, the visual thinking company, to help people develop a shared understanding so that they can make better, faster decisions and work better together to create more lasting, sustainable impact. As a leader and a teacher, he has trained thousands of people in the art of the possible. He has written 3 books on design, change, and innovation. In this episode, we talk about creativity, liminality, the importance of mindset in order to unleash transformation, art school, our personal lives, and how we see the future. Tune in. So I'm very excited to welcome Dave Gray to Transforming Worlds. Hello, Dave. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Carola?
Oh, I'm very excited to be speaking with you. I'm a big fan and admirer for a very long time. We'll get to that. For our listeners, tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
My name is Dave Gray, and I'm an artist. I'm a creator. I try to do things differently every time I do them, so it's hard to answer that question with a simple answer.
Yeah. And when was the first time that you called yourself an artist?
I think it was probably one of I imagine it was probably one of my first words.
Wow. And how did you
Uh,
know?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm not sure.
I think
Um,
many people, especially within our listening communities, a lot of people wonder whether they're even allowed to call themselves that. And so it's also nice to kind of feel into what it is that, makes you say it, because it's so important that we do. Especially those of us who bring our creative skills to our daily endeavors. Sometimes it does take daring to say that. So I think maybe that's also the reason why you're such a big inspiration to many of us, because you really you feel that deeply, and then you project that in everything you do. So on this podcast, we talk about transformation. What is transforming for you these days?
well, I've excuse me. I've started a school. I'm in my second year of that, so that's definitely where my creative energy is right now.
Yeah, it's a school of
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah.
Yeah, and you call yourself a possibilitarian. So when one goes to the school of possibility, one learns about how to take the next best step or the best next step, not sure which one it is. How does that process unfold?
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of what is an artist, what is a creator, and the answer to that question is whenever you begin the process of creating anything, you don't know where it's going to go or what is going to happen. So that's the case in our school as well. As what I'm trying to do there is recreate the magic that I felt when I first got to art school. The creative journey is an adventure. So it's not helpful to know how the adventure turns out when you begin, because then it's not an adventure.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Many years ago, I wrote a book that's called Change Ahead, and in it, I had this rallying call asking people to bring the ad into venture, because I
Mm.
think we've been venturing and looking at the capitalistic way of things for way too long, and we need to bring that sense of adventure back. And so I fully agree with you. But it is probably one of the most uncomfortable places to be at for many people. And why is that so, do you think?
People do all kinds of things where not knowing is exactly what makes it interesting and fun.
Do you think that
Uh,
there's a difference in not knowing what to do versus not knowing what will happen?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. Some people don't like horror movies. Some people do. Some people like to be scared. Some people, uh, my dad was very strange in this way. He had to know the end of the book before he would read a book. He didn't want, so he would read the end, and then if it didn't have a happy ending, he would not read the book.
Wow.
So he was a little bit obsessive in that way, and I think uh, maybe for him that was about wanting to be comfortable, and creativity by its nature is it isn't something that is you can know in advance. I mean, if you know the answer, it's not creativity.
You've done a lot from explain into game storming, and then you started looking at the liminality of things and how our mindset. I think you say at some point something about for people to truly transform, something has to transform inside of them. I'm paraphrasing horribly, but conceptually, this is the direction. How did you get to this conclusion?
Uh, not by any plan, but I think the way that the creative life works is you get interested in something, you get a lot of creative energy and curiosity about it. You start to explore it, not just mentally by reading books, but by making things and doing things with your hands. And so, and you formulate projects, and you give yourself a creative project, and you make something, and you learn through that process, and then you finish. That part of a creative life is, I think, it's made up of creative projects. So you have, and
Mhm.
if you every time you begin a project, if you know how it's going to end, then it's really not a creative project. So you have to continually be giving yourself something to do in order to satisfy that curiosity and figure something out and make something. And then you finish it and you put it out in the world, and you see what happens. It's in a way, every creative project is like an experiment that and then based on what comes out of that experiment, hopefully you find another experiment. You don't do the same experiment over and over. So, the Explain was my um, first thing I tried, where I tried to create a company. That was the kind of the challenge there, is how do you make a company? And the reason that I needed to do that was because I had the previous project. I had been doing information graphics for newspapers. I was a news artist, and did a lot of explanatory pictures, and um, the newspapers were in decline as an industry. So I needed to find some way to employ this skill in a way that was going to be useful to society outside of the newspaper industry. So that became a company, because I couldn't find a job. And so I basically tried to, made the, had the idea of, maybe I can create a job. Maybe I can find a way to find customers for this, which I did. So that project led to a bunch of different kind of experiments uh, that's probably what got me interested in this whole idea of transformation, because, I didn't know when I started who would buy infographics and why. I just
Mhm.
knew that I had this ability, I had this skill, and then it had a power to it, that it could help people grasp pretty complex information much more quickly and easily than any other way that I knew of. So turns out that is helpful in transformation, inside of organizations, especially when you have a new thing that you're trying to explain to people. Um, well, that's in the name. Do you have something you need to explain?
Right.
And that was the company that I founded. And so in that process, I learned that explaining things, so that's where game storming came out of, because when we started that company, we started to figure out, okay, where's the information that needs to be explained? Well, it's not anywhere. It's in 50 different people's heads in 50 different ways. So the picture becomes not just, let's draw a picture of what's already in your head, but let's create a picture of what's collectively in all these different people's heads. So in order to do that, uh, we needed to develop all kinds of ways to run meetings to create visualizations, and that's where game storming came out of that. So it was a toolkit that we developed because this was a process that we needed to scale. We needed to get other people, we needed to train people on and hire people. It wasn't like you could just hire explainers at that time.
Mm.
We had to train them
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that became game storming, which is still my most popular book, and
I know. I
definitely,
love it.
uh, definitely very hugely popular in workshops and other
Yeah.
things. And that so then game storming was a method for to help us, collect ideas into pictures to explain change and transformation. But then I also realized that so this is the results of that project leads to the next project, and so in realizing that um, we were able to explain things, but the organization still had trouble with change and transformation. Turns out, even when people understand something perfectly well, um, if they don't want to change, they won't. They will resist, and not only that, they people will resist in ways that are socially appropriate or passive aggressive. They'll
Yes.
nod and say, "Yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do that,"
Mm.
and then they don't do it. So it became evident that just having clarity and explaining things was not enough. And that's where the liminal thinking work came from. Is if clarity isn't enough, then what else is required? And it turns out it's what's required is to really gain a pretty deep understanding of where people are coming from and what they're afraid of and what they uh, and what they believe. Because if I believe that the change is going to result in me being out of a job, of course I'm not going to support the change. If I believe it's the wrong thing for the company, then I'm going to resist it. I have to not only understand the change, I have to believe that it's a good thing and that it'll be good for me.
Mhm.
So, and
And
then,
then that eventually led you to the School of Possibility. So
yeah,
probably your vocabulary evolved along the way. So initially, in terms of, graphics and visualization, it was really about integrating and bringing things together in a way that an image can be more than 1,000 words, to use the cliche. Then understanding that this also had to do with the explicitation and the collaborative effort of everyone being supportive of that integration into whatever models or visuals were needed, and even game storming. I mean, all of us, I think, that have worked with the tools and game storming have favorites. I mean, there's some that I just pull out of my hat now. Even while improvising with clients, like, well, we don't know where we're going, we don't know what the future is going to look like, and boom, cover stories right there, right? Just to sort of name one. Or at some point there was a database where you could actually say tools for what, and then it would give you on the game storming website, it will give you alternatives, and you become kind of literate in that. But still, that's still not called change until we start realizing, hey, this is actually leading to change. But why is change not happening? What's happening with transformation? What does that need? And then that led into possibility, which is what you're working on now. Is that more or less how that flow went?
well, there's more to it than that because every time whenever you embark on a creative project, you don't know what you're going to learn, and so there's the stuff that you learn.
Right.
Some of the things that you learn are things that you like. Some of the things that you learn are things, oh, I don't like that so much. That's not so, So one of the things I learned in starting a company was I really didn't like being a boss. I really didn't like having employees.
Yeah.
I really didn't. I mean, have had creating the company creates jobs, which is wonderful. But somebody has to run it, and the person who runs it doesn't get to do the fun job. And also, I learned that, people don't really want, so one place they don't want unexpected uncertainty and creativity is their boss. And that's pretty much the opposite of, who I am as a person. So it didn't work out. And so when I did finally sell the company, um, so that was a process of letting go. Then it uh, where the school of the possible came from. I mean, I suppose I've always been a possibilitarian, although I didn't always have that word. I think I got the word from my friend Greg Petroff, who's calls himself a possibilitarian. Um, so then it was like, now what? I'd identified myself with this company for so long. I know what I don't want. I don't want employees. I don't want a company.
Yeah.
But I don't want a boss either. I don't want to go work for get a job and work for an institution. So what did I like about running a company or having a company? I like having customers. I enjoy, customers are a kind of relationship that, you don't get in life, from any other place. I mean, your friends, your family, they will lie to you for your own good, to protect you.
Lovingly they will,
Yeah,
yeah.
lovingly, they will lie to you and they will protect you and they want you to be happy and comfortable. Customers will tell you the truth, which is wonderful. If you really want to be effective in the world, um, customers are wonderful because they give you feedback about how well you're doing. What can I create for people that I can do joyfully that, um, will create joy for other people?
Hmm.
Um, I'm not a good musician. I'm not a stand-up comic. I'm not an entertainer, but I can create space for people to explore their creativity, for people to learn in groups. I have all these game streaming skills that I can bring to, help groups explore their creativity. And
Hmm.
that, and in kind of doing the inventory of my life, what are the moments when I felt most fulfilled, happiest? Um, we all have moments that where you feel like you're in the right place with the right people, doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way. And so for me, that was art school. I had been a student in art school in the 80s. In the 90s, I was a teacher. I taught at a university art school. And so, yeah, that was where I naturally, that was something that I felt I could really do joyfully and bring that art school experience into people's lives in a in a way that, didn't have to be like full time. I think school should be something that, um, doesn't end at age 22. I think it should be something that should be you could have as part of your life if
Hmm.
you want it, forever, and it doesn't have to end. And the thing about art school for me that was so meaningful was being uh, in a community of people who understood the importance and value of creative work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do creative work, do it in a very solitary way, but it's better. It's much better when you can do it with other people.
I think that's actually where, particularly where art and design meet. So I'm not an artist, at least not educated as one, but I am a designer. And sometimes what really bothers me about the design discipline is this obsession with process. It's like, okay, who cares, right? Like, let's focus on the outcome and let's improvise part of our way there intelligently, not, not just pure guesswork, but really in this experimental way, in this learning way, in this inquiry that you're referring to, which is like any answer is going to give us feedback. So let's, keep moving in the direction of what we're trying to create, and not this kind of craftsmanship, dogmatic way of looking at things. I think we can learn a lot from art as a discipline in this sense, because art has much more of an expressive quality and much more of a story to tell, really, whereas design tends to drive us to something more practical, something more tangible, more in service of a particular outcome. And I think that that's one of the things that really drew me to your work initially, is having this space in which an exploration could happen in a safe and contained way. There would be surprises for sure, but it would be clear what we're talking about, what we're looking to understand, and then we could go into the depths of things. And it was probably somewhere around my 40s that someone explained to me different modes of learning. And one of the modes of perceiving reality and learning is kinesthetic. And then I said, oh my gosh, this is why I like putting visuals in space and moving them around and understanding them and visualizing the whole system so that I can understand the parts. I think that this is where art and design can meet one another, especially when it comes to transformation. So in design, we talk about transformation as the capacity of changing existing conditions into preferred ones. This is a definition by the late Herbert Simon from the Carnegie Mellon School of Design. And I really like it because it's like you're seeing things as they are, existing conditions, but there is a preferable way of doing it. Preferable for whom? That's a very important question to answer, right? It's not just because I want it, could be. And that is a valid answer, because I could be making very alternative art just because I need to express it, and that's preferable for me. Hey, that's fine. But also understanding, how can we encompass more things? How do you look at transformation from an art school mindset?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of just differentiating art from design. I mean, art is something you do for yourself, and design is something you do for other people, for clients, maybe. Art, maybe design is about, pleasing a client, and art, maybe it's about pleasing or moving an audience.
Hmm, that's
Um,
nice.
I'm just thinking about, I'm reflecting on what you
Yeah.
said. So, yeah, art is, and I do think art is uh, about, and maybe change work and design work all are about transfer of emotion. Like um, you want to create a feeling. Design is also about utility. A part of that is the feeling that it's easy to use or easy to do something, make life easier, or in some ways make it more difficult. That can be something that is
For sure.
designed.
Yeah.
Like in video games, they do a very good job of making it just hard enough to keep you focused and engaged to get to
Mhm.
the next level and achieve your reward or whatever. Um, and that was really part of the shift for me, is from, and I would say I was operating at XPLANE, I was operating it as a designer. I was working for clients, for customers, and working to serve their needs. And when I decided to start the School of the Possible, um, so you do math, right? When you're thinking about how you're going to spend your time, because uh, we all have the creative challenge of creating a life whilst making a living.
Yeah.
So you do the math. How am I going to be able to support myself? And so for me, you know, when I was at Explain, when I was operating at, working mostly for large companies, mostly like, probably if you didn't have $25,000, there was no work I could do for you. When when you're paying me $20,000 for a project, then I got to jump when you say jump. And if you were going to have a call on a Saturday or the middle of the night, then I'm going to, have to be there. Or I can set constraints or limits, but I'm pretty much, at your, you know, I'm gonna I'm gonna need to be conforming to your system
Yeah.
and your way of doing things. Whereas if you're paying me $20 a month, you don't have the same expectation that you're going to be able to, like, I don't think I can call up Netflix and tell them what I want to see on
Sure, but
Netflix.
that is true. But I think that you've never been one for low expectations. I mean, like in most of your work, you didn't know that you would have the success that you've had. I mean, XPLANE is a tier one company. Game Storming has been an international bestseller, probably translated to several languages. When you were designing, drawing, and thinking about what Game Storming would be, you felt the potency for sure, but there's no guarantee that the audience would receive it the way it did. And I think that that's true for this as well. So although there is a monetary aspect to it, because we've got to pay our supermarket bills and have a roof above our heads, I think that the reason that you're doing it and how I've read through it preparing for this conversation as well is much more about mobilizing many people into possibility. And that is
Well,
so
uh,
important in 2025.
yeah, but also I think, here's the thing. Here's the reason why I think for me, low expectations is important. Because I want the freedom to experiment. I want to be able to tell you that I don't know what you're going to get. I want to be able to say that we're going to figure it out. We're going to find out. So I think, and it has to be fun for me, or if I'm going to do it, you know. And so um, I think there's a big difference, but I am taking a kind of a Netflix approach, which is okay, what's going to be fun? What's going to be interesting? What's going to be helpful? What do I know about the audience so far? I have there's about 100 members in the school right now. I know most of them personally. I've had one-on-one conversations with a lot of them. So I get a sense of what they want, and probably because because I mean, so another part of it is that in the 30 years that I've been doing all this work, I met a lot of interesting people who didn't have $20,000 to hire me, but
Yeah.
went to a workshop or saw me give a talk or read the book or for whatever reason are interested in what I might do. And I think part of it is again, like Netflix or like a movie. I can give people a trailer, but I also want to reserve the right to surprise and change and do experiments and fail. Because if it's this is also just maybe again back to being an artist. If I know everything that's going to happen this year in the School of the Possible, it's not going to be fun for me.
Oh, for sure. I love the way that John Cleese, when he talks about creativity, how he frames it, and he says, when you're being creative, nothing is wrong.
Hmm.
When you're being creative, nothing is wrong. When you're being creative, nothing is wrong. I love it.
Yeah, I like that too. Although I can also see the other side of it, which is if there's no chance of failure, then you're not being creative.
For sure, but it's
Uh,
not failing. It's learning.
you're right.
It's pivoting. It's
Yeah.
iterating. It's you know, and
Well, think about it. Take a film director. Let's take Ridley Scott. He's made a lot of movies. He's
yeah,
probably in his he's had flops.
sure.
He's made movies. I mean, you could conceivably call them failures. I agree that they're learning. One thing that's wonderful about a film director is that um, I think that life is beautiful because you have a craft, a skill, and you know how to organize people to make something. And every time you do a movie, it's going to be a completely different thing. So
I
every
think that's
time,
true of drawing as well.
mhm.
I like I have these side hobbies because I'm a designer, not an artist, but I can't help myself. And I've done courses for illustrating children's books and these kinds of things. And then we would get together in the city where I live, which is the city of Utrecht, and a lot of the sort of professional illustrators would claim that you develop a style, and then it's very difficult to not draw the same way you've always drawn. And we would get together, and then there would be these people, and one of them was a illustrator of high school books on the natural world. And he's like, so I brought my dinosaurs. We're going to draw them today because I want to see your style. And so I'm like, okay, gosh, how am I going to draw a dinosaur and not fail, right? That kind of thinking. So I decided to just look at the dinosaur and not look at the paper and pick a kind of thick pencil so that you couldn't see the detail. And he was looking at me and observing the way I drew. And he's like, you are not looking at what you're drawing. You're looking at the thing, but you're not looking at your drawing. I'm like, yeah, it's the only way I can make myself do this. And he's like, gosh, I'm going to try that too. So I wonder if in something like, working with the plasticity of graphic design, whether we get into ruts as well, and how might we step out of those? Because I think we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's back to Ridley Scott again. If you've seen Gladiator 2, it's a
Yes.
total disaster. It's a mess because he tried to do Gladiator 1 all over again. And it was, I hope you're not watching this, Ridley. But it was very disappointing because, and I think that was the reason, is like that maybe the last one was so successful that it was hard to escape the trap or the rut of, trying to recreate and build on what was good
Mhm.
about the first one. And I do think that's definitely a trap. But there's also there's a guy named Robert Henry who wrote a book called The Art Spirit, which I love, and I've first encountered it when I was in college, but I've reread it several times since. One of these things he says is that technique is something that you invent to solve a problem that you're facing right now. So it's always being invented, and there is great pleasure in inventing exactly the right technique to solve the problem that is in front of you. And I think it's the difference between being a cook and a chef. If you're a cook, you're pulling the recipes out, and game storming is essentially a recipe book.
Yeah.
Um, but the real master practitioners of game storming are people who are not only pulling out tried and true recipes like the cover story that you mentioned,
Mm.
but are also inventing. It's one thing to be able to cook, right? And it's another thing to be the kind of person who can walk into a kitchen and look at the tools and look in the pantry and look in the refrigerator and see what's available, and without getting anything else, without going to the store,
Mhm.
can make an amazing meal. That's more like a chef. That's
Yeah.
someone who's
I
that's
love
a
Yeah, I love that analogy because I think that I'm a cookbook author. Actually, I
oh
told you I've got hobbies on the side. I actually did all of the photography for my cookbook, and
wow.
it's one of those things that you couldn't kind of imagine. Like, talk about surprises. It became award winning because I'm Argentinian, and everyone in the world thinks that the only thing we cook is beef. So people were curious. Okay, what else do Argentinians make? Anyway, long story for another podcast. But if I look at the steps in your story, you talk about managing a system or learning how to run a company, dealing with change, dealing with transformation, or understanding where transformation sits, and eventually moving into possibility. This is cooking. This is cooking. Cooking is, okay, what's there? Do I have a full overview of what I might play with? How am I going to change it in order to create the meal? What needs to transform in me in order to do that? How can I look at things from a new perspective and understand what might be created? And finally, how do I create a possibility through that for others to gather around a table, to have conversations, to feed themselves, to nourish themselves, to etc., etc. I think it's a beautiful metaphor for the kind of process that you've been through. And I think also as a game storming practitioner, a facilitator for sure, once you become literate in what that means, in kind of what that enables for understanding the system, making change happen, mobilizing the transformation and creating the possibility, then you can create your own visuals for sure, because you start realizing what it takes. But we did need the master to write the book, because otherwise I certainly wouldn't have gotten there that fast. There is this sort of catalyst of that new way of thinking that is given by practice and sort of putting in the hours. I got inspiration from you. Where do you get inspiration?
Oh, I've had the luck of having a lot of wonderful mentors over the course of my life and career. I mean, there was a guy named Michael Doyle. He's passed away now, but he was kind of like my Obi-Wan.
Mhm.
He wrote a book called he started a company called Interaction Associates, and he wrote a book with David Strauss called How to Make Meetings Work, which was published in I think the 1970s. It was a wonderful book about it was actually I believe it was the first book that's actually started talking about facilitation as a thing that um, is important. That the idea that we could separate the process of the meeting from the power in the meeting, and that the boss didn't always have to be the one who ran the meeting.
Wow.
And that so it's still a great book. Um, it's some parts of it are a little dated, but it's still a wonderful book to read. And I met him and befriended him. There's another um, man who was a really wonderful influence in my life. His name is Randy Root, who's the founder of a company called Root Learning,
Hmm.
which was very early and very kind of infographic,
Yeah.
game board kind of oriented um, approach to organizational learning. And I worked for him for a summer when I was teaching when I was an art teacher. I had a summer job. I went to Toledo and I worked for him. And
Hmm.
because I didn't have any friends there, I would go into the office on the weekends, and he and I would often be the only people. We were usually the only people there, so he would take me out to lunch occasionally, and I got to know him. And he was the person who inspired me that I could actually start a company.
Wow.
Have that it could be fun, that it could be an adventure, that it didn't have to be that business and entrepreneurship didn't have to be you know that it could be a creative act. And of course, now I can't see it as anything other than a creative act.
So many people look at nature or at technology to understand how change and metamorphosis take place. Are these sources of learning for you as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to invoke Robert Henry again, and also my friend Austin Kleon, who wrote a book called Steal Like an Artist.
Yeah.
But I think, what Robert Henry says is beautiful. He says everything, all of your experience, everyone who's ever existed, every book you can ever get your hands on, every artist that ever created, the conversation that you had yesterday, all this is available to you. All
Yeah.
this, and the natural world as well. All this is available to you. All this is raw material for you to think with and work with. Um, there's nothing that's off limits. And I think that's part of um, what can really fuel creativity is taking inspiration from places that people don't think to take inspiration from, things that are all around you all the time, um, above you, below you, around you.
Yeah. Yeah, just like
Absolutely.
Austin Kleon did with the newspaper blackouts, indeed, initially,
Yeah,
which I think
indeed.
is so brilliant. I mean, he's had me laughing for hours with some of the, some of the things that he
Mhm.
could actually read
Yeah.
into the newspaper. So yeah, yeah, but it's difficult to do. I think we get carried away in the busyness of every day and all of the tasks and chores and must do's, and we forget to sense into all of this. Perhaps with the advent of artificial intelligence that does look everywhere, we will
Mm.
be we will be moved to try and do that ourselves as well. I don't know, but it's easy to forget. So you've had now your possibilitarians for a year, right? The first cohort has just finished their first
Yeah.
year. You're moving into your second cohort. Maybe in, I don't know, say 10 years, you will have 10 cohorts and an alumni network. How will they be changing the world?
Well, if I knew, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?
Sure, but there is a, we don't know, and we won't know until then, but everything in the creative process somewhere. I mean, Stephen Pressfield, if we believe him, there is a muse. Rick Rubin would say probably the same. There is a yearning that is leading you to do that, to say, hey, man, this is not paying the bills, but I need to be here right now at 20 euros and then 30 euros because it's the price is going up by the time we
Yes.
publish this podcast.
Yeah.
So it's 30 euros, 30 euros a month. There's something that is making you want to do this. There's a hope, there's a belief, there's a longing, there's a yearning, there's a hunch. I
Mm,
don't know what it is. You tell me.
yeah. Well, I would say the creative life, which I described as kind of like this kind of like stepping stone, learning journey of, following your curiosity, going from project to project. It's not for everybody, but it is available to anybody, everybody. If you want a creative life, you can have one. And so one thing that I want is to make it clear to people that that is a possibility, that you can have, and it doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, there's also no guarantees in the creative life. Um, there's no guarantee of success. And so it needs to be, if you want to have a creative life, it needs to be something that you do that brings you joy, whether or not you get an audience, whether or not you find customers, whether or not you end up getting paid for it or getting rich. It's like, okay, it's great if you can be Miles Davis or Madonna, and or Taylor Swift, right? That's wonderful. That's a wonderful outcome of a creative life, but it's not um, there's no guarantee of anything like that for any of us. So it has to be something that's fun to do. And for me, the School of the Possible is fun to do, and that's enough. It's fun. I'm I'm creating, and it's also the other thing about the creative life is it's more fun with friends.
Yeah.
And so the reason that I'm doing it, the selfish reason I'm doing it is because I want to spend my time with interesting people who are doing interesting things. And um, that's the reason pretty much everybody who's in there is they want to, not all the time, but, a couple days a week, they want to hang out with interesting people doing interesting things, and they want to be inspired to do interesting things and to explore their creative self. Some people are doing music. Some people are doing, novels. Some people are doing, more businessy kind of things like online courses. But everyone's got a project. And there's something about, and this is maybe, you say you didn't go to art school. I don't know what kind of training you have, but it sounds like it's very, you do work with your hands a lot.
Yeah.
Um, there's something very powerful. For me, there's something very powerful about art school. Every week, uh, I would have to show up in the class and put something on the wall. And I would have to put it up next to all my other uh, classmates.
Classmates. Yeah.
There's something very powerful about seeing being required to show up and to show your work and being with a group of people who's also doing that. And, it's not like, in school, if you're learning a thing and you take a test, there's a right answer. in creative work, we're not all doing the same thing to the same level. Everyone's doing something different.
Yeah.
In creative work, it's like, you know, 10 people writing a novel. They're not going to write the same novel or a short story. They're not doing a good job if they're all writing the same short story. And when we were, in my case, making pictures, everyone's having to create a different picture. So in a way, you're comparing, uh, and that's part of the process of creative feedback and critique and creative work, is that you have to compare things that are not the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As you're like being a movie critic, you're gonna like every movie is new. Of course, you can give it 10 stars or two thumbs up or whatever, but every single one has to be judged on its own merits. What was it trying to do? It, you know, if it's a mystery, it's going to have a
I
whole
think
different.
that's so important. Like, obviously, in that sense, art and design are similar. And for us, it's called the crit, and the crit is never about a person. So it's
Mhm.
that simple. It's about the thing, whatever it is that you're creating in whichever form and whichever state, because it's outside of you, we can have a conversation. If it's inside of you, then it's personal. But once it's out, it's about the form it took. And that's so important in transformation, right? So transformation is a cross form. It's really transform. You can only understand things once they are manifest in form, and then you can change them again, and then again, and then again. But without going through the form, there's no skin in the game, and therefore there's no learning possible. So interesting that you asked the question about my educational background. Before that, like you, I also had a father and a mother. I have a mother, and both my parents are medical doctors. So for me, it was absolutely unspeakable with my level of intelligence and privilege to go to art school. So it's always been what I do on the side, and I can't stop. And that's why I do funny things like writing cookbooks and making my own photography of food, which is like ridiculously difficult, all the way to making drawings and writing fiction. But that's again for another podcast. But the important thing about that and how it enriches my professional endeavor is that every time, and that's the joy you talked about, I am building new perspectives. I am opening myself to the world and the world to me, to understand it, to love it, to cherish it, to try it, to taste it, to experience it. And this is why the creative endeavor is possibilitarian. And it's very hopeful because as a designer, a lot of what I speak, particularly in the topics of regeneration, in the topics of systems collapse, which require transformation as well, tends to be or lean towards pessimism. And this aspect of possibilitarianism, if it is a word, in bringing the optimistic back into the room is a quality that is very needed in this time. And I think that that's why, although you can't answer what the world will look like in, say, 20 years, once those possibilitarians in your community are out there, I do think that they have a critical role in modeling possibility, in modeling alternatives, in modeling perspectives. In my book I wrote 10 years ago called Change Ahead, I bring in a concept that I've used a lot with clients, which is the quest for questions. So don't go looking for answers because, I mean, how the hell can you know, right? But what will be the next question you're going to have? Do you know what your next question is, Dave?
Yeah, I actually have a bunch of questions about all the stuff you just said,
Okay,
honestly,
cool.
or thoughts and reflections. Number one, of course, your parents didn't want you to go to art school. And nobody wants their kids to go to art school.
Oh,
I mean, pretty much. I mean, the parents want their kids to be successful. Um, and, no one, and this is speaking as someone who showed up in an art school, no one was there because that's what their parents wanted for them. Everyone had uh, had to exhibit a certain level of stubbornness and independence, of maybe almost fierce level of independence in order to even get there.
Mm.
And there's something pretty magical about that. People are there because they chose to be there. They want to be there. They're not just drifting in a path that's kind of been laid out for them. So that was a very powerful thing. That's something that I wanted to respond to. I think, okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. The other thing about feedback and critique, the reason that it's so important to get feedback from other creative people is that as a creator, you you're too positive about your work. You love it too much. You fall in love with the work that you make. So it's hard for you to be realistic about it. As a creator, you're going to tend to be overly positive and optimistic about your work. So you're not giving yourself the feedback that's really going to make it better. And as a producer of creative work, someone who maybe is a manager or someone or a customer, um, you're going to be not that open to unusual ideas. So you're going to negatively judge things that might be great because they haven't been done before. Like um, Seinfeld is a great example of a show that almost didn't get made because the producers, there was nothing like it. It was kind of like uh, it was sort of like Saturday Night Live, and it was sort of like a sitcom, but there had never been a sitcom about nothing before.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost didn't get made. And the only reason it did get made is because it was the producers were late night. They weren't sitcom producers. They were late night people, the writers and producers.
Yeah.
So they made it happen because they believed in it. I think that's what is so great about fellow creative people is that they are open to unusual ideas, but they're not in love with your work just because you made it. And so they're really in the best position to give you the best kind of feedback about your work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be opposed to something because it's never been done before. They're going to be open to the unusual ideas, but they're not so in love with your as you tend to get with your own work. So they can
Yeah.
help you see that peer perspective is really valuable. Um, and then to the back to the optimism thing, I think,
Mm.
and modeling. I think it's so true that you use the word literacy, and I think that is something, a creative literacy is something that you can develop, and it's an extremely useful skill, especially when you're walking into a world where you can't necessarily anticipate. We have AI right now. We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we never really have had any good idea about what the jobs of the future were going to look like, and
Wow.
but now even less so than ever before. We don't know um, what um, what the world is going to look like. And there is a lot of pessimism out there. There's a lot of doom and gloom, and there's a lot of reasons to be concerned, good reasons.
Yeah.
But I do believe that creative literacy is one of our best um, uh, opportunities for um, creating a better world. And I also think, that a lot of people just don't believe that a good life is possible for them in the current world. They don't believe that they have choices, and I think that ultimately creativity is about, not only is it about making choices, but it's about creating choices. And this comes back to the idea of creating customers. I think most people think that they have to, in order to survive, they have to find a job. And they don't people don't necessarily default or lean into the idea that they can create a job by creating customers. And people think, okay, well, selling, then I'd have to learn how to sell, and that's sleazy, and I don't want to be a salesperson. And well, the thing that I think is important to remember is you're gonna sell yourself even if you have to even if you're going to get a job, you're gonna have to sell yourself, right? You're gonna have to sell yourself to an employer. And when you get a job, you have the the work that you do is chosen by somebody else, and you're going to conform to their system. And you still have a customer, except you just have one customer. It's the person who signs your paycheck, right? Is it one single customer, and they decide what the work is that you do. They decide what good is. Whereas if you think about, instead of finding a job, you think about creating customers. You think about your your you flip that script, you invert that a little bit. You say, okay, well, how can I serve? How can I what can I do that's worth other people paying for? Now you're not just making a choice, you're creating choices for other people. You're creating something that people can buy that wasn't available to them before. And a company is going to want you to fit in, but customers are going to want you to stand out. They want to know how you're different. And if you want to have a life where you're really exploring your uniqueness and you're not just shaving yourself and, you know, rounding off all the hard edges of who you are to fit in somebody else's box, if you want to truly explore your uniqueness, then the way to do that is to think about customers, creating a customer. And I think if more people took the approach of creating customers instead of finding jobs, there's no lack of problems that need solving in the world. There's no lack of things that need doing. And there's going to be customers for almost anything that you might imagine that you want to do. That's a way to change the world. If you don't believe that we should be pursuing endless growth, you could start something. You can start a sustainable food cart. you know, there's the only limit to what you can do is your creative mindset. And people are frustrated with systems and that are around us. But we change the system by changing what we do every day. And we can change what we do every day by being creative about thinking about how we can serve and what the value is that we might create. So I think if I have a vision for how the School of the Possible can change the world or change society, that's it. It's one person at a time deciding they're not going to fit in to an existing system. They're going to create alternatives, and they're going to embody and live those alternatives, and yes, sell them and create new things for people to buy that are better
and that are relevant in a multiplicity of ways. I mean,
yeah.
Enough of the kind of one size fits all, right? This multiplicity, this plurality is so important, and it's the creatives that bring that into the world. Yeah. Beautiful. I can't wait for that to happen. So for those in our audience who don't know you, where can they find you and your work?
Schoolofthepossible.com.
Okay. We will add that to the show notes and a couple of other things that you mentioned. I'd really love to thank you for this conversation, for showing us a bit of your world and your mindset. I've certainly learned a lot, and it really fills my creative heart to have spoken to you today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.